Sometimes it's like
nice if you like
put your.
Is it the table or is it me?
It is the table.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really weird. This is the Said No One Ever podcast, a podcast about things you never knew you wanted to hear about. I'm your host, Martin Moore. Let's get into it. So I just want to apologize for this episode. We had a couple technical difficulties with my mic, which in my opinion is the least important of the two mics because the guest is much more important.
Yes, testing. 1, 2, 3.
I tried to fix it as best I could, but I apologize. My mic sort of cuts out and you can hear me in the background. So yeah. Anyways, tried to fix it. I'm super excited for this episode. It's called You're Not Funny. It's with someone who I've wanted to get on the show for a long time because I think I'm a funny person, but my wife doesn't think I'm a funny person. But I've had a couple conversations with her. It's at networking events and just off mic. And I just really wanted to get her on and kind of talk about comedy and humor and what makes things funny and sort of get into the nuances of comedy. So I'm super excited to have her here. She's a new face in the comedy scene, a writer, a mother, the owner of The White Agency, someone I find really funny. Ladies and gentlemen, Sorrina Beecher.
Sorrina B is here. What's
Welcome.
going on, everybody?
How are you?
I'm doing so good. This is going to be deliriously wonderful because
Yes.
I've been up since 4:30.
Why?
I just had work to do.
You just got lost in a Pinterest rabbit hole?
No, I wish it was that fun.
So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, tell the listeners a little bit about who you are, what it is you do, where you come from.
Yeah. I'm from Mars.
Really?
No, just kidding. So I am a writer. I consider myself a writer at the root. That kind of extends to everything I do. And I live just outside the city in St. Francis. And I grew up in Ozaukee County, which is the root of all my humor and comedy. And I'm a mother. My son just turned 18.
Is that weird?
No, I mean, it's like everybody keeps asking me that. I'm like, I feel like I just turned 21.
Sure.
Like, it's very, I don't know if that's a good thing, but it is very, very surreal. But yeah, and I own The White Agency, branding, content, and SEO strategist, and work with a lot of brands and organizations, mostly out of state these days, but a few organizations here.
Sure. So I want to get into some of the nuances of humor and comedy. You know, what makes something funny? Why do some people not get humor? Are there certain jokes that should be off limits? And how do we use comedy as a coping mechanism? How do we use comedy as a way to reach people and deliver themes and messages in a way that's much more accessible and creates less tension? Because comedy is used to talk about prejudice and politics and racism and COVID and just a myriad of themes where a lot of people have or share otherwise sort of myopic viewpoints. And, comedy makes some of these societal discussions much more accessible. And we've seen comedians like Dave Chappelle and Leslie Jones and Jon Stewart open up topics and conversations to the masses in a way that news and politicians and other media and communication formats just can't. So I guess to get into it, my first question is to you. What has been your favorite episode of this podcast so far? Because I know you've listened to them all.
I've listened to every single, I know, I was like, I've listened to every single episode, and my favorite one is the one that I get to do with you, Martin.
Well, I thought my first and only joke of this episode was funny.
I love it.
Anyways, so let's just get into it here. What do you think makes something funny? Or I guess sort of a two-part question is, what makes something funny to you, and what makes something funny in sort of a universal term?
Oh, gosh. I'll tell you. Well, that's the thing. Like, humor is universal. But I will tell you that when I moved down south to North Carolina, spent time in South Carolina, they did not find my Midwestern humor as funny as everybody did here. So
Sure.
That was a wake-up call.
Is that weird?
It was super weird. They think our, Midwestern humor it's a special brand of humor, and you really don't realize it because we're in it every day,
sure,
right?
For
We're
sure.
just always shooting the shit, and we're very sarcastic. We're a little dry here.
Yes.
When I moved down
time.
south, they thought I was being like a stuck-up snob. Like
Really?
they're like, she's so sarcastic. She doesn't take anything seriously. And they just didn't get it.
Totally.
And so I went from being voted second funniest in my senior class.
Yeah.
To being like, no one understood me.
Yeah.
Like they didn't get it at all. I would sit at parties like, I just wish I could go home right now.
Right. Wow. So how did you navigate that? How did you adapt?
I just kept being weird. I think people were just like, she's weird. She's from Wisconsin, so I just kept with it. But I think also because my family, I do have a lot of Southern roots, so that's a different brand of humor too. And so I think I got the best of both worlds.
Where are you originally from again?
I'm originally from Port Washington, Saukville.
Okay.
So Zaki County, but
that's where I grew up.
That's right. I forgot about we talked about that. It is a bubble that I love so much. I love bubbles.
It's one of those places that I love and hate all at the same time.
Totally. It's a love-hate relationship for sure.
What are some of the things you think are universally funny? Because you talk about how you went down south and people didn't find you funny. What are some of the things you think are kind of just universally funny to everyone?
I think relationships.
Yes.
I think relationships with your parents, with your significant other. I think those things are always funny. I'm a little immature, so like if I see like those TikToks where people like fall really horribly, but don't get hurt. Don't get hurt. Let me just put that out there. I will crack up. I'm not real big on potty humor, but it can be funny, right? Like it can be funny. So I think that can be anywhere around the world.
So one of the interesting things I find about comedy is like slapstick comedy and like how big it is in Europe, and over here, like I don't get it.
Wait, so are you into like the smashing the watermelon shtick? No, do you know what I'm talking about? It was like that guy. Yes. Gallagher.
Okay, that was funny.
I was like, I don't get it. It just seems like a waste of fruit. But that's.
I remember that dude, and all he would do is just smash watermelons with like axes and chairs and all kinds of different stuff, and like that's what you went there for. You brought your swim goggles, sat in the front row, and like just hoped that you get watermelon on you. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the whole Chris Rock, Will Smith thing that happened at the Oscars. I kind of want to get your take on this as we're talking about, what makes something funny. Because there was obviously something that wasn't funny about that joke to Will Smith. Kind of what was your takeaway from that?
Pretty much went into a rabbit hole like with everybody else during that. I was reading all kinds of horrible think pieces.
Yeah. See what other people think.
Okay, so when it comes to the joke itself, I found it very trivial. Could be seen as like a compliment. G.I. Jane was badass, right? Like Demi Moore, like she rocked that. So I didn't think it was that bad. Now you have all the alopecia folks coming in.
And rightly so.
I feel like maybe not enough people knew about her diagnosis with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I think Chris Rock probably didn't know she had alopecia. It was a very trivial joke, but I think there's so much behind the scenes with the dynamic between Jada and Will.
Oh, definitely.
Clearly. Because he was laughing. He was laughing. He was doing
he took that slap like a champ.
We just shoot you a look and you better do something.
It was just shocking to see on national television.
I felt bad for him. This is why I felt bad for him, because clearly he's having a little bit of a breakdown. So I couldn't, like a lot of people were railing against him.
Everyone was railing against him.
Like clearly he's having a bad day.
Right?
He's having a really bad day. Like whenever I see people like that, like in line at McDonald's,
Karens
and
and
they're
Kens,
losing their ish and they're screaming at the cashier, I'm like, I'm going to pray for you.
Right.
It doesn't always make them feel better in the moment.
Yeah, it was just shocking. I mean, I feel like when you go to the Oscars, like you know what you're signing up for. The last 5-10 years, I mean, like if you're there front row and you have people like Ricky Gervais there telling those jokes, you know that you're going to be a target.
That's the trade-off. You get great seats, but you're a target.
I mean, they went after Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, a couple years ago, so they'll go after anyone.
Yeah,
they don't care.
They don't care who it is. I mean, that's the one night where they can do that, right, and not maybe suffer career consequences.
It's just so bizarre, and it I kind of want to use that as a segue to touch on another theme that we've sort of seen with comedy, in that, especially in air quotes, like the woke culture.
Yeah.
Are we getting to a point where, like, I mean, comedy was always that one safe place where comedians could tell the truth about things.
Absolutely.
And get into topics, and we're getting into the space now where comedians are being canceled, or they're getting fucking hit on stage on national TV. I mean,
Right.
Are we at a weird sort of inflection point where like comedians now have to think about what they say?
I think it
Or,
is.
fuck it.
No, I think it is. So even before I started doing stand up, I still followed comedy, and now I'm in some like comedian groups. Some of them have like national, it's a big group, like all over, not just Wisconsin. But everybody is having this conversation.
Are they?
Everybody is talking about it because it's like, oh, I guess I'm going to get canceled if I talk
Right.
about this, or should we not talk about this? Or there's even comedy clubs who are sending, ledgers before a show with like a whole list of rules, and some of them are deep. It's like, what do you talk about?
Right.
Because there's literally like there's so many rules, and some people are trying to be conscious of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with level setting.
Mm-hmm.
You level set, maybe not talking about people. That's the other thing. There's this rule. It's kind of like, what, if you don't identify with that group, there's a line between observational humor and bullying.
Yeah.
Or observational humor and not, calling out a group that you're not a part of. If you don't have a voice in that conversation, maybe stay out. So that's the way that I think a lot of people are approaching it now.
And I mean that does make sense. But I mean, you look at someone like Dave Chappelle, who his last, did you watch his last special?
Yeah, and then I saw him at Summerfest.
Some of the themes that he was getting into with the trans community and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people didn't really understand the message he was trying to convey. And
that's
he thought
the
he was
problem.
just attacking a particular group in society.
Totally. I think right now the problem is people are jumping to conclusions, and they're just so quick to attack and counterpoint. And the thing that
offended by something.
Exactly. And the thing I love about comedians, the thing that I love about writers, artists, creatives, they sort of provide, like, they monitor society, they reflect on it, and then they kind of push our boundaries. So whenever we're talking about boundaries, that's where, if they're pushing boundaries, then, that's the level where people aren't comfortable, and it changes and it shape shifts over time.
Well, exactly. And I think one of the things I really love and enjoy about going to shows, especially if the comedian is someone who doesn't look like me or, is someone that I have something in common with, I enjoy being the butt of a joke sometimes, because it makes you take a step back and just kind of think about the message that they're actually trying to convey.
It's a mirror on society, and sometimes
really
it's exaggerated, and sometimes it's, I just think that if we can't look at ourselves and you can't look at yourselves in the mirror,
100%,
then how do we ever know where we are?
Well, exactly.
Or where we're going. I mean, there were a lot of things that were hilarious 100 years ago.
Right.
Downright shameful, especially as a woman of color, when it's like, oh, wow.
Now with everything on the internet, I mean, you can go back and look at jokes that, Richard Pryor or George Carlin or whoever was saying back in the day. And it's like, I mean, there's a lot of jokes that haven't aged well. And in a world now where everything you do and say is recorded on the internet, is that going to be weaponized against you 20 years from now? Like, I just feel like there's so much as a comedian. I mean, I'm not a comedian. I feel like I feel like there's so many hurdles now and rungs on the ladder that you have to climb and be careful that you don't fall.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gotta be.
It's
sort of
the thing that I love about comedy and I love about comedians. There's no veneer.
Yeah.
There's no facade. It is, Richard Pryor talked about being on crack.
Right.
He talked about growing up in a brothel, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And these were things that could be swept under the rug in everyday society, but these are things that are talked about on stage. And with that, race, sexuality, all of these things were talked about, politics on stage, and that's where we have our public discourse.
Yes.
They just do it in a different medium, and that's humor.
And I think humor, because humor, like math, is such a universal language, you can convey...
Except in Florida, but we'll leave that alone.
You can convey some of these themes and these messages and these societal issues that we have and reach audiences in a much more tensionless way than you otherwise could in news or as a politician or someone that's delivering it in a very dry sort of state.
Yeah.
You make it much more accessible when you say something and make a very blunt point about something, but then there's a joke at the end of it, everyone laughs, and you kind of
Yeah.
then feel
It's levity. It brings levity to life is really
Yes.
what it does.
And I really think that comedians, like, I always circle back to Dave Chappelle, Wanda Sykes, Jon Stewart, they do such an excellent job, and they're so careful and so particular about the messages and the themes that they're getting into, and to make sure that they deliver a joke at the end that sort of lowers the temperature in the room after they've told it, and it makes people sort of take a step back and go, okay, maybe I should think about what they're at,
Yeah, I mean, stories have impact, and it's just another way to storytell. And there are those punchline kind of people, the bit people, but when it comes to like that comedic storytelling, that's my favorite.
I love that too. Yeah. I agree. How do you think, and I think you and I have talked about this too, like off the mic before in some of the events we've gotten to, like how can humor be used as sort of a coping mechanism? Because I know there's a lot of comedians who had rough lives or were bullied, and they use it as a sort of a coping mechanism, or maybe they have a disability or something like that.
It's definitely an outlet. I mean, when I started stand up, it was about 2 years ago, and I was coming out of a really rough situation, a rough relationship situation, and I wanted to like break out. Sure. And looking back, I have always dealt with things with humor. Growing up in Ozaukee County, being biracial, living in a blended family, that sort of thing that wasn't normal where I lived, I learned how to embrace it with humor. Sure. I'm sure it made a lot of people uncomfortable along the way, but that's how I dealt with it. Yeah. Maybe I dealt with it to sort of an extreme level looking back, but I was young. Yeah. But, and then, when I was 18, I became a teen mom. And so, I mean, like how else, for me, the way that I deal with things is finding the humor. Yeah. And I do that, through my writing and through now comedy. And there's just way too many things that have happened in my life that I have to look at the humor.
Yeah.
If I don't, I would crumble.
Well, for sure. I mean, there's opportunity in humor. There's prosperity in humor. There's perspective in humor. Yeah. And when you use that as a coping mechanism, you're just in a much better state of mind than just walking around in misery with your own thoughts.
It's crazy. On TikTok, there are people, doing videos from Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they were comedic. And it was like, here I was 2 weeks ago and here's now, but they made a joke about it. Yeah. Now that I don't know if I would be able to find the humor in that, but
right.
But that's their way of coping with it, is taking in what's happening and trying to find any kind of levity. Mm-hmm. And I just can't imagine doing it in that situation, right. But it's there, it happens. And some of the greatest works of art come out of those pressure cooker
100%,
periods.
100% right.
And there is this joke that all comedians are we're just depressed. We're living in despair. There's a lot of pain. I don't think it's that. I think we talk about it. I think that's the difference.
I mean, a lot of people bottle that stuff up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, they don't have a way to express that. Mm-hmm. Whereas comedians or musicians or filmmakers or artists, those are the ways that they express the things that everyone else in everyday life kind of bottles in.
And that's why we're all drawn to it, right? Like we all listen to music. We all take in art.
It's so relatable. Mm-hmm. Do you know who Ali Wong is?
Of course.
Yeah. So her, what I consider top 3 comedian for me, she has her Baby Cobra episode on Netflix. Some of the stuff she talks about, and boy, it gets dirty and vulgar, but the things she talks about being a first-time mom and being pregnant, I mean, she's talking real shit to real mothers. Yeah,
that they don't tell you about in those books sometimes.
That they don't glorify, and that maybe have made their lives miserable.
Yeah.
And she makes humor out of it, and it creates a sort of sense of community, whether you're talking about women who, mothers, or you're talking about maybe a particular race or a political group or whatever it is. It creates community, and especially in situations where people may feel like it's a subject that they can't talk about, or it's a hot topic. And it's fascinating how comedy can do that in a way, again, that other outlets.
Oh, yeah. I mean, comedians that, like Chris Rock when he talked about his divorce, or Kevin Hart when he dealt with his scandal, like they talk about it. And the thing is, they're not alone, right? There are people in that audience relating to them.
Exactly. How do you feel about people? This episode is called "You're Not Funny," which is my wife, sometimes she'll disagree, but like she does not think I'm a funny person. How do you feel about like people who, for the most part, don't like get jokes, or they don't find a lot of things funny aside from like the low hanging fart jokes?
Yeah.
It's like slapstick comedy, or like watching like newsreel bloopers, like just the real low hanging.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's entitled to the humor that they're drawn to. I will say that. And, you know, it's funny, being in the comedy scene as much as I am, you know, not as much as many others, but there's all kinds of different kinds of humor. You know, there's the dry, there's the witty, there's the people that talk about things like their past substance abuse issues or suicide attempts and make it funny, and their parents passing away, you know, grief and all those things that are taboo topics. Exactly. So I think everybody's entitled to their sort of humor, but when people, I don't know, I've always been the type of person, like I'm not good with people who are too serious.
Yeah.
You know, like I have my business hat and I'm very, very serious about my business and growing my business and making connections and all the strategic networking, you know, all those things.
All the LinkedIn buzzwords.
Corporate lingo. I'm very, very, and like that is one hat, but really at the end of the day, like once I start working with somebody, I'm like, listen. Yeah. Let me be real. Yeah. I'm wearing flannel pants below this Zoom screen. Like,
I mean, do you feel like that's one of the reasons why self-deprecating humor is
that's like
really
all of my
popular
humor? There's two reasons, I think. One is it's so much easier to talk about yourself, and I think me as a beginner in comedy, it is easier to talk about myself because I know myself, I know my experiences.
Sure.
It's harder for me to branch off to the observational and make it even more relatable for the audience. That's something I'm working on right now.
So you need to like talk about
and then you can't get in trouble, hopefully, if you're talking about yourself. And I think that's kind of why, you know,
you can't cancel me about talking about
and if you
myself.
don't take yourself too seriously, and I don't take myself too seriously, I mean, I think it's funny. Some of the stuff that's happened, I look back and I'm like, that really happened. Like my first car accident, I hit a police car. That is hilarious. I mean, it wasn't funny in the moment, but looking back, now it's like a joke in the family.
You see your face the moment you hit it and realize.
Oh God, it was bad. I apologize to the cop in Port Washington. I'm sorry I hit your car and ruined your day. Oh yeah, and I begged them to not tell my parents. And I was driving 17, and I was driving my parents' brand new Dodge Caravan. I was like, please don't tell my parents. They're like, oh, the front end is hanging off. We kind of got it's kind of this thing called the rule of law.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
There's many more escapades.
Do you think there's certain things that we should never tell jokes about? Or is that sort of I know that's a tough
No,
question.
it is a tough question. I don't think so. I think now, can somebody write a bad joke about something bad? Yes, but I think there are a lot of talented people who can write it well. Because writing, you know, that's usually a big part of it. But there's some people that just get on stage and you're like, ooh. Everybody's looking at each other like in the crowd, and you're like, right. They need to maybe go back to their notebook and work on that one. So, I mean, you know, but that's where you work out those kinks, right? And some people may never get to that level where they work out those kinks and then they don't do so well, you know.
What was it like the first time you like performed in front of people?
Well, I mean, I'm still mostly an open micer. I'm just now booking my first slate of shows.
That's
you know,
more than I've ever done.
so okay. Well, I feel like I have to back up a little bit.
Believe it or not, I don't have a Netflix or HBO special.
I mean, I'm nowhere. I might be able to like write the credits. So this is going to sound so weird, but my son's father has been doing stand-up since he was 18. I met him at 15. Oh, wow. So I would go to shows with him, and we would watch a ton of comedy. I've always loved comedy. I love reading, you know, satirical essay collections, and I love watching comedy, and our family was just funny, you know, so it was just, I always have been drawn to comedy, and he, in the past couple of years, had been trying to convince me. He's like, Sorrina, just try it.
Yeah.
And I was like, no,
Actually,
never.
You realize what you're asking.
I mean,
me to do, right?
I'm kind of a karaoke queen, so like I'm not totally afraid of people, but
Okay.
like telling a joke is way more
Right?
scarier, right? Like no one cares if I'm actually good at karaoke.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't make
Sort
them
of the goal is
laugh,
to be bad at karaoke.
right?
That's
Like
what
if
get
you
on
don't
TikTok.
make them laugh, then it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So my mom my parents were visiting from North Carolina. They just happened to be in town. I was like, Mom, come with me to the East Side Bremen Cafe and so come with me and support me. I'm gonna do this open mic. And I called the guy I was with at the time, and he was like, are you an effing fool? I would never do that. Don't do it. Like, you're gonna make such a fool of yourself. This was my ex. This is why we're not together.
Okay.
And it was at that tail end, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
So I went. My son's father was also there, and we're friends. And let me just throw that out there. We're good friends. We've known each other for so long. Obviously, we have a child together, co-parent, and I put him in the joke, and I started talking about like being a teen mom. I want to say the joke, but I'm a little nervous for other people to hear it. Basically, I was like, don't trust a high school senior to pull out. And my mom was in the audience, so I was like sweating, and I was so scared, but I'm like, I'm just going to say it because I was like gearing up, and he was in the audience, and it couldn't have worked better because they all know him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was kind of in the room full of comics that all knew him, but it like everybody started cracking up, and it was like, oh, I like this.
Sure.
It was like electricity, and I was like, I want to keep doing this, I think. So I just been working at my set, but then the pandemic happened a few months later. So it's like, I feel like it's just been a lot of, putters, and then I started a business. So,
Sure.
but yeah, that's how I started. And then I've just been doing open mics ever since. And then I met my current boyfriend in the comedy scene.
Hey, that works.
He has a professional corporate job, but it is kind of funny. I'm like, I swear to God, that's a coincidence. I am not a comedy groupie. I have no interest in any other comedians. It just happened.
Yeah.
18 years apart.
We're back on track. Sorry, I had a little technical issue. That's
Technical
the
difficulties.
That's the kind of stuff that like
We'll be back right after this sponsored
freaks
message.
me out about doing this fucking podcast. So we were talking about certain things that like you should never tell jokes about. Like you don't think we should like.
I think everything should be talked about.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. There's a way to do it.
I think so many.
Not everybody's good at it. Let me just add that
I can
little
guarantee
clause.
you, I'm not. Do you feel like comedians? There's a different sort of respect for a comedian telling a joke who does it professionally and gets sort of the nuances of comedy versus just like a moron like me trying to make a joke about something.
Unless it's your job. No, I think anybody can be funny. And there's people who are funny in person, like with people, suck at on stage, right?
Sure.
Like they're horrible on stage.
Which would be me.
No, we're going to convince Martin to get to an open mic. But I honestly believe that anybody can be funny.
Yeah.
If that's like who they are in their nature. I mean, that was one of my fears about trying stand-up. I was like, yeah, my friends think I'm funny, or I was kind of a class clown growing up, but that doesn't exactly translate to the stage.
Right.
That's a different ballgame. That's where I'm still trying to figure out. And then I'm a writer. So with my stand-up, I was taking like clips of my essays, my satirical essays.
Sure.
And trying to bring them to the stage. And you have to change everything because it doesn't hit the same.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So, I mean, it's always a challenge trying to do it in a stand-up format and being on stage. But I think anybody's funny. You don't have to be a comic to be funny.
Yeah.
A lot of comics aren't that funny off stage. Can I say
Really?
that?
Are you
Am I
serious?
allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Well, everybody's more of a, an exaggerated version. I mean, we get off stage, we're like, you going to get a beer?
Right.
Yeah, let's go get. No, I'm kidding.
How do you?
I'm kidding. Actually, now that I think about it, after we get off stage, we always kind of hang out, and I'm always cracking up. But some people are very different off stage and on stage.
Really?
Yeah, totally.
See, and I've told you this before, like one of my favorite podcasts is Smartless with Sean Hayes, Jason Bateman, and Will Arnett, because just the way that they are kind of talking to each other, it's so natural and fun. And then there's other comedians that like sort of bug me where like they're always like doing their bit like no matter when you're talking to them, like Jim Carrey
he was the
Robin
first
Williams
person that
was
came
one
to
that was like
mind.
that. Like
Where they were kind of over the top
yeah,
always.
all the time.
Yeah.
Like you were never able to get like a serious minute out of them.
Yeah.
Like, do you see that with like a lot of comedians that you know?
No, not personally. I mean, I've certainly have heard stories, and I think right now, if I understand it, like right now we're in a much friendlier comedy scene
Sure.
than in years past. So I know a lot of people who've been in it for a long time, 10, 15 years or more. And so I think I kind of came in at a good time.
Oh, for sure.
It's not as catty. It's not as clicky, but
Right.
still everybody talks about each other and like if they are funny or not funny or
Yeah.
But it's also very supportive. And it is. I mean, at least I find it is.
Do you have a favorite like funny movie that like I know that's a tough question.
No, it is. I'm just like not very much of a movie buff.
Okay.
I grew up without cable, and so like I just feel like I'm late to
Hello,
the game
fam.
in movies, right? That's why I am the way I am. It explains everything. I watched a lot of PBS. I love Bridesmaids.
Dude, that movie's so
I mean,
good.
I just like I.
That was really
I love that movie.
that was really the beginning, the catalyst for like a lot of these newer like all female cast comedies,
right?
That weren't like B or C list movies, like
right.
Top,
It wasn't like Thelma and
like
Louise.
top tier. There was a really funny one that came out a few years ago with like Tiffany Haddish.
Girls Trip.
Yes, Girls Trip.
Yeah, Girls Trip.
And it's just like it's awesome to see women out there doing that and creating like just A-list, top tier, comedic movies like that have otherwise typically been dominated by men. Hangover and all that kind of shit, you know. And I'm really enjoying some of the movies that are coming out and some of the female comedians that are really taking it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been able to see sort of the transition. We always had like, you know, Gilda Radner and like some of these Carol Burnett, all of these classic Joan. Oh my gosh, her name escapes me. Joan
Rivers.
Joan Rivers.
Yeah.
You know, all of these people who really broke barriers, but it didn't quite crack open the door for a lot of women to come into it. So I think now with like these comics becoming mothers and like that was taboo before and they didn't do that because they were afraid to ruin their career. I think we're seeing the evolution and now we're really in an era where anybody has a platform.
Right.
And so we're seeing much more people kind of outside of those comedic tropes come into this space.
Well,
and that's been like really
look
cool
at
to see.
Lily Singh.
Oh yeah,
Like,
for sure.
I mean, she got her whole
Lisa Kudzik.
all off of social media.
We're seeing
and
a lot of black alt comics too,
Yeah.
where it's not just like, oh, I grew up in the hood. It's
Yeah.
like I'm a nerd and I love comic books, or like my parents were Asian, you know, and just
Right.
like these dynamic families and people that are finally getting time on stage, and I think it's great to see.
It's actually really interesting, you know, that you bring that up because there's so many platforms these days that boomers like us didn't have, you know, when we were growing up. TikTok, Vine, YouTube, SoundCloud if you're a musician. I mean, there's just so much access and opportunity to be heard from no matter where you live, how old you are. And it's just really, it's a really cool time to be alive. Also a shitty time to be alive because people can attack you.
It's a lot of pressure.
But yeah.
It's a lot. I mean, like right now they're telling comedians, if you don't have that social media following, how do we expect you to sell tickets?
Right.
If you don't have that fan base. So it's like, you got to try to grow your fan base. And that's the part where, you know, I'm not sure if I'm jumping into that part, but you know, for other comedians that are performing, they are constantly being told like, build your social, like my boyfriend, Ton Johnson.
Sure.
One of Milwaukee's best comedians, just performed at the Riverside with Charlie Barron's, little plug.
Ooh, I just met
4
Charlie
shows.
Barron's last weekend for the first time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, got a nice little
So
selfie.
he's a friend.
He's a funny guy.
Yeah, he's awesome. But, you know, he's had incredible social media.
Yeah.
I mean, what does he have? Like 4 million across all channels,
Yeah.
like 5 million. It's huge. So anyways, that's how you sell tickets if you want to get to that level.
Right. All right. This is final big question.
Yeah.
So I asked you, I don't know if you actually did it,
Mm-hmm.
but we were going to do like a top 10 favorite, either comedians or actors.
Yes.
Did you do it?
I have a top 10 favorite right now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Who I love
That's fine.
right now.
So
Okay.
we'll do yours and then I'll do mine.
We're going to compare
And then we'll compare and just get into quick a little bit.
Mine's going to be so basic. Okay.
Oh, that's totally fine.
Dave Chappelle, obviously.
Oh, okay.
I
There's
mean,
number one.
Mark Twain.
That gets a
award
star
winner.
right there.
I actually loved Chris Rock because he talked about his divorce. He talked about how hard it was being a parent. Like, I just love his stories. D. Ray Davis, hilarious.
I don't know who that is.
Check him out. He's so funny. Also, he's quite handsome. Josh Johnson, he's one of the kind of the black alt comics. He's a super young guy. Really came up during quarantine. Really. So he's an up and comer. So is Jabuki White. I believe he's biracial as well, and he's just hilarious. He's also queer, so he's just like a totally new comic to follow. I love the dry humor of Nate Bargatze.
I don't know that.
Oh, I think you would definitely like him. Best-selling, same thing. She's like very kind of dry and talks slow, but she is hilarious. Michelle Buteau.
Ooh,
she
nice.
is also, I love her. Ton Johnson, because I love you, baby. Tig Notaro. I love Tig. And a lot of these are writers, too, and I just love, Anyways, those are my top 10 favorite, like, right now.
Damn, we only had one.
That's
Chappelle was the only one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, hit me.
Okay, so mine was Dave Chappelle, Jon Stewart,
Oh, yeah.
Ali Wong,
I love it.
Wanda Sykes, Leslie Jones, Kate McKinnon.
Oh, I love Kate.
I know.
I love, like, that's a girl crush right there.
Jason Bateman, Danny McBride, Bill Murray, and John Oliver.
That's funny. Bill Murray. That's almost like a throwback.
Yeah.
I watched a lot.
And a
of
lot of
movies
these are, most of these are, a lot of them are like really dry comedians, but a lot of them are, really, Dave Chappelle, Jon Stewart, Wanda Sykes, Leslie Jones, just the way that they deliver some of their jokes and the themes and stuff they get into, and just again how they're able to sort of like connect people who may disagree on something or may not get something. It's just I really love that kind of comedy. I think that's my
really
favorite type of
And all those people give other people a platform.
Yeah,
it's like very.
They're also smart too.
Oh my gosh!
Like you look at them and you're just like,
did you see Dave Chappelle's Mark Twain performance?
No.
When he got the Mark Twain Award.
Oh yes, I did.
If you guys haven't seen it, do yourself a favor.
It's just shocking how intelligent he is.
It is brilliant.
Yeah,
it is brilliant.
Oh. Well, Sorrina, thank you so much for hopping on this episode.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, some of the audio issues aren't a huge deal. I'll get them sorted out.
It's all good.
Where can people find you?
You can find me at Sorrina B, SORRINA_BEE. I'm not very active there, but you will find me. Working on it. And yeah, I think I'm going to be, where am I going to be later this month? I'll be at Uli's Tobacco Lounge on May 14th. And I will be at Best Place on May 19th.
Perfect.
So come check it out. Got a little showcase for you.
Thanks so much.
You're so welcome.